Hi there everyone, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to view this screencast. My name is Chris Hubbard, and I'm one of the science specialists here in the district. I'm coming to you on behalf of all the elementary science specialists in Newport-Mesa when I tell you that we have some exciting news for you. And that's that science resources are available for you right now. See, science specialists from around the district continue to be probed by classroom teachers about science resources. Where can you get them? What should you be teaching? And to me, this is extremely positive and encouraging. It means that in spite of everything else that's being put on your plate this year, in spite of everything else that you're being asked to do, there are still a lot of teachers that want to teach science, that want to teach the right science. You just don't know where to start. This presentation is designed to guide you towards resources that are ready for you when you are ready to start teaching science in your own classroom. A little bit of background on the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS, as they are called for short. One of the first things you'll notice is that the standards are not called standards. They're called performance expectations, or PEs. When you hear us talking about performance expectations, just note, in your mind, you can think these are the standards. Okay. Now, as you read through the NGSS PEs, they sound like they're written in much the same way, use a lot of the same language that you find in Common Core. And that's because they pretty much are Common Core. Now, the story I keep hearing, and the rumor is, that the reason that NGSS isn't called Common Core Science is that Bill Gates owned the copyright and just didn't want to let other content areas use the name Common Core. I keep hearing the story, but I'm not sure if it's entirely true or not. A couple of things I can say for certain is that Common Core was already into its adoption process when the creation of NGSS began. And getting through the adoption process for NGSS was a little more complicated because it used a two-step process. The first step going through the scientific community to make sure all of the science that was proposed was actually correct, and the second step going through the educational community to make sure that everything was scaffolded and framed appropriately. So back to the language of NGSS and the performance expectations. All of the language and the way that the PEs are framed, the way everything is put together, is going to look very familiar and very similar to the Common Core that you already know and are working with currently. Something we can say for certain about NGSS is that it's going to forever change the way that we approach and teach science in our classrooms. One thing we cannot change is testing. There will be end-of-the-year testing on the Next Generation Science Standards. It will be called the CAST, the California Science Test, and it will be an online test similar to the SBAC. Testing will still take place in 5th and 8th grades and once during high school, which is very similar to our old system. However, in 5th grade, students will be tested on science practices and performance expectations from kindergarten through 5th grade. Along the same lines, the 8th grade test will now cover science practices and performance expectations from grades 6 through 8. The California version of the Next Generation Science Standards framework was officially adopted last year in November of 2016. Because of that, publishers hadn't started on working on textbook materials until that was done. Since the framework could have changed, however unlikely that was, they actually didn't get started working on anything until it was completed, meaning in the last few months or so. This means that we will not have any published California-approved materials that we can adopt and use in our classrooms for at least another 2 or 3 more years. Obviously, this is not an ideal situation, and that's why the elementary science specialists have tried to compile, organize, and group as many resources as we can for you, the classroom teachers, so that when you're ready, you have science resources that you can use to teach science in your own classroom. So let's talk about the first resource I want to introduce to you, and that's the FOSS curriculum. Now, as you can see, all I did was Google search FOSS web, and it's the first one that I want to pop up. Now, some of you may be familiar with FOSS because it's a resource that's been in our district for a little while. Okay, so I'm already logged in, and we're actually going to touch on how to sign up for FOSS a little bit later. But right now I want to just spend some time talking about what you're going to see when you go into FOSS. Now, my FOSS modules are going to look a little overwhelming. Okay, and that's because I've got 21 books because I teach all 7 of the grade levels. When you do this and sign up, you're actually only going to have 3. So hopefully this ends up being a little bit more manageable and easier to look at. I'm just going to click on Energy. Here I'm just going to choose this particular book and click on, and when I do, you're going to see that it's laid out, and all of the books are laid out in the same way. You have 4 sections. You have Teaching the Module, Materials and Kit Information, Teacher Resources, and Digital Only Resources. Now, in Teaching the Module, you have things like Investigation Guide, you have Teacher Prep, etc. This is where you're going to find a lot of hands-on activities. Now, this section, as well as the Materials and Kit Information section, is pretty much where your science specialist is going to hang out, where they're going to be utilizing the FOSS resources. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that you cannot use these things, because if any of my teachers that I teach with at East Bluff came to me and said that they wanted to teach one of the hands-on lessons that I had planned, I would be absolutely ecstatic. I would go out of my way to make sure that they had all of the supplies and all of the materials and everything they needed. I'd go and find something else for me to do in the lab so that they, well, or you, as a classroom teacher, could feel supported in the things that you wanted to do and in the science that you wanted to teach. But likely, what you're probably more interested in are the teacher resources and the digital only resources. Now, in teacher resources, Notebook Masters here, these are going to be your resources or your worksheets that go along with the hands-on investigation. So again, unless you're doing the hands-on investigations, probably something your science specialist is going to be using, but under that are teacher masters. These are worksheets that are going to go along with the actual lessons you would be teaching if you were teaching a lesson or a science topic. Below that you have assessment masters and assessment chapter. This is where you can find resources and information on assessment, of course. You can find banks of questions that you can pull from. And the assessment chapter covers a lot of information about assessing in NGSS style, and it'll also do the best they can to correlate the FOSS materials with the next generation science standard performance expectations as well. Now, in the digital only resources, in this last column here, this is another place I think you're going to spend a lot of time with the FOSS resources. Under the multimedia tab, you're going to see a lot of games, a lot of interactive things that you can do that are only available through FOSS. Now, the student e-book is available in 2 different versions. There's an interactive book and there's a PDF book. And each one has its merits. Upper grade, this is the only textbook you have. 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers, you will only have access to an e-book. Primary classes, however, you actually have tangible, physical textbooks that the district has purchased. The district bought 1 textbook for every approximately 2 students at your school. So at East Bluff, where I teach and we have pretty much 2 classrooms at every grade level, we have 1 class set of the books. Okay, and like I said before, everyone has access to these ebooks. So if you're one-to-one with Chromebooks or iPads already or any other sort of digital device, then every one of your students can have access to the FOSS textbooks. Now, as I said before, there are 2 versions of the ebook. There's the interactive and the PDF. Both are good and have their merits. depending on what it is that you're looking to or trying to do. I find this to be a personal preference sort of thing, and you may like one or the other better. The interactive has a lot of things to click. It's got a lot of things for the student to do. It will read for the students if we click on any one of these speaker icons. It opens pictures and videos. You actually have areas where you can quiz students. On the other side, it does make a lot of noise and can be very distracting to themselves, to others, to you. So if your students all don't have headsets or earbuds, right, this can make a lot of noise and be distracting in the room. The PDF, on the other hand, functions a little bit more like a traditional book, or something that you might see in an e-reader. Right, so as we're clicking side to side, it flips pages. It has the look and feel of a real book on the screen. But on the other side of that one, you lose all the fun activities and the fun things that kids can do and click on that might enhance their learning as you're going through these science topics. And then finally, down below, you have a lot of other types of resources, streaming videos. You have focus questions, vocabulary, recommended books and websites, and things like that. FOSS has even created interactive board presentations, if you're familiar with any of those, in the different formats that you can just download to help deliver content and teach a lesson. Now, in vocabulary, we've actually included that in another resource that I'll be talking about in a few moments. So I'll touch on that in a little bit. But there are so many resources here that I just don't have enough time to go through them all. The last thing I do want to say about the FOSS resources is that there's a disconnect between FOSS and the Next Generation Science Standards. Now, I can't speak for certain, but what I think happened is that FOSS was looking to be one of the first publishers to have a Next Generation Science Standard correlated material. It looks as though FOSS took what they already had in existing units, which was great, by the way, but just moved it to where it touched on the same topic as in Next Generation Science Standards, whether it touched directly on them or not. They worked with what they had to create the best correlation they could, but in my opinion, it isn't always correlated very well. So what you see are a lot of resources that are in places, but they don't really fit, or they don't really have a whole lot of meaningful connection to NGSS. It's not a resource that we can just use and follow with confidence. Right? FOSS isn't something that will connect to all of our NGSS topics and performance expectations that we need to teach. This is why the science specialists in Newport-Mesa got together and created a much more comprehensive and hopefully a much better connected list of resources for you to use. So now let's talk a little bit about our next resource, and that's the Google Drive folder that's been created and that we've titled Science Resources for Classroom Teachers. And hopefully this has already been shared for you or will be shared to you soon. This resource was born from the idea that there were no available resources that directly align to the Next Generation Science Standard performance expectations for you to use right now. So the science specialists thought that we needed to compile resources that would help classroom teachers include more science into their instruction and into their classrooms. What we intended with all of this was that classroom teachers sort of follow the lead of the science specialists at your school and then bring science into your classroom when you have time. Realistically, we understand what's going on in the district right now and all of the requirements being placed on the classroom teachers. In spite of that, though, as I mentioned earlier, many classroom teachers still want resources and still want to teach science. So we took it upon ourselves to develop this compilation of resources for you to access when you have time. So let's start with what it's going to look like when you open up this Drive folder. And you will open it up and you'll see all the different grade level folders and a few other folders and resources here at the bottom of this page. Now, when you go into your grade level folder, you're going to see things arranged maybe a little differently than you might expect. I'm going to go in here into this third grade folder. Now, you might have expected to see physical, life, and earth science folders, but in Next Generation Science Standards, Physical life and earth sciences are gone the way we used to think about them. Now, the PEs are coded with physical life and earth science coding, but the way that we used to teach science and the way we approached it is moving away from physical life and earth science in silos. Instead, NGSS PEs are grouped by topic. So what you see when you come into your grade level folder are these different topics. Now, each of these topics might contain ideas that include physical life and earth science PEs, but that's because they each relate to that more specific topic. And we'll go into that more in a little bit. You'll also see a folder marked Linked Resources. Please stay out of the Linked Resources folder. You actually don't ever need to be in there. Everything that's there is just simply housed there. It's more like a dumping grounds, if you will, of resources that you're going to find throughout your grade levels folder. To make it easier for you to use, we hyperlinked everything that's in these linked resources files into the actual documents you'll be using. This way all you have to do is click on them and they'll open up. Now, evidence statements are a version of the performance expectations, but I find them a lot easier to use than the grouped lists. They're individualized and they give you a more refined view and more detailed information about what each performance expectation is asking for. Below, you'll see earth, life, and physical science vocabulary. Now, I said earlier, and I know that earth, physical, and life sciences are gone, but we named these long before we came up with our system of grouping topics, and these are based on the vocabulary that came from the FOSS and physical life and earth science formats, and we just haven't yet broken them out. But these are all of your FOSS vocabulary words put together in word wall cards so that you can print them out, cut them out, and display them for your students. Now, this is every physical life and earth science word. So you probably need to go through these with a little bit more of a discernible eye about what you print and cut and want to use. But they're all here and available for you. Finally, each grade level will have your NGSS PEs at a glance. And this is a really quick version of the performance expectations that you can reference all on one sheet and then go into the evidence statements later if you're looking for more information about them. Now, moving into any of these topic folders, you'll see the performance expectation documents. This is predominantly where you're going to find your resources. Every performance expectation document at every grade level is laid out the same. At the top, you'll have whatever ELA resources we could find. After that, you'll have video resources. Below that, interactive simulation resources, and then finally, hands-on activities that you can do in the classroom. We've listed the groupings in order of what we thought classroom teachers would prefer. So you'll always see ELA resources at the top, followed by videos, interactive simulations, and activities last. It's important to note that these are all living documents. We filled these performance expectation documents with resources to make them usable at all grade levels, but we were moving quickly. Of course, some performance expectation have lots of resources, and others are more sparsely completed. We'll be adding and adjusting content to best fit within the performance expectations as more resources become available. Our intention is that this resource will improve over time as more resources become available and as we get better at grouping them into their most appropriate topics. Now, one of the best things about these resources is that they've all been reviewed by teachers for appropriate content. So you could open and use anything on the list that you find in here with confidence. Right now, we're currently working to download and store all of the resources so that what we have suggested doesn't disappear at any point. Finally, I want to touch on some of these other resources that we have. So I'm going to take you back to our main folder. Now, below all of the grade level folders, you'll see curricular resources, Next Generation Science Standards, Printable NGSS Anchor Visuals, etc. This is where you'll find other curriculum and other resources that are available to you. I said we would come back for how to sign up for FOSS resources. Well, this is going to be under your curricular resources and under FOSS information. In this folder, we have 3 easy steps for FOSS Web. This is going to go through how to get signed up. It's an easy to follow PDF that steps you through it in 3 easy steps. Below that, there's FOSS codes for students so that you can set up student accounts for ebooks. FOSS codes for teachers so that you can go into FOSS, sign up, get your modules, and be able to see what it was that we were showing you earlier with the resources and teacher materials and things like that. When using the FOSS codes for teachers, please make sure that you only register for your grade level, as we do have a limited number of licenses for each of the units. Then finally at the bottom, there's a PowerPoint here that goes over how to use FOSS Web. Now it's a little outdated. FOSS has updated their website over the summer, and we just haven't yet gotten to fixing the PowerPoint visuals. But most of the information is the same, even though the layout of FOSS Web has changed. Now in the NGSS folder, what you're going to get is background, purpose, strategies, things like that for using the next generation science standards. There's also a folder with information about testing as it relates to the next generation science standards as well. Below that, you have the printable NGSS Anchor visuals. This is where you can find resources on cross-cutting symbols, practice and concept cards, science and engineering practices that you can print out and display in your classroom. Finally, you'll find information near the bottom on the 5E lesson plan. The next generation science standards have embraced the 5E lesson plan idea, and most of the PEs are based on this 5E lesson strategy. So now let's talk a little bit more about how to approach all of these resources we've just talked about, how to gain access for these resources, and how to use them to best fit what you're trying to get out of science in your own classroom. So first and foremost, you're going to want to start with your specialist pacing plans. Now these should all have already been emailed to you or hand delivered at some point throughout the beginning of this year. And they're going to give you a good structure and outline for the pacing for science this year, and give you an idea of the layout for what your specialist is teaching. Now, all of the specialist pacing plans should be somewhat similar. These here just happen to be mine. Now, as we look at them, they'll all have some very consistent and similar information on them. You're going to have weeks here in this first column, dates, weeks. This just happens to be primary, so there's fewer lessons because they come every other week. In an upper grade, you'll see more lessons here. So these first few columns are going to give you a lot of the basic information about what's going on in the science lab. If you haven't already gotten these pacing plans, it'll be important for you to email or get into contact with your science specialist and ask them to send their pacing plans to you, and they'll do it right away. Primary, you're actually going to end up with 3 columns to the right of that basic information that I was just talking about, and upper grade you're going to have just 2 columns. And this has to do with a difference in the FOSS resources that we were talking about before. See, upper grade, you don't have a textbook, only the ebook option. Where primary, you have a textbook. So we have textbook correlation page and ebook correlation page. You may be asking, why are they different? Well, the ebook is set out in modules. So you have the 3 different modules for the different strands of science, where the textbook has all of the strands together and combined. So the textbook is numerical 1 through, let's just say, 200, where the ebook is going to have, say, 1 through 65, so the page numbers are going to be just a little bit different. So we've gone through, outlined what was important, and put them on here for these outlines for you. Now another thing you're going to see is that lessons are grouped not in that physical life and earth that we talked about before, but they're grouped into this idea of pushes and pulls, animals, plants, and their environment. That's in kindergarten. In 4th grade, waves and information, structure, function, and information processing, energy, etc. These lessons are grouped together in an order and a structure that makes sense through using the next generation science standards topical groupings. So going back and reinforcing sort of what I talked about before, where this idea that physical life and Earth don't really exist anymore, we're grouping things by topic, and so we've done that both in the Google Drive and also on our outlines. But to sort of highlight what we're talking about here, in this kinder lesson right here you can see we have a life science standard followed by a life science standard. So you may be looking at animals, plants, and their environment saying this is life science, but then you come in here with an earth science and an earth science. What this really is all about is that plants and animals, through their needs, can change their physical environment. And so even though this is earth science standards, right, they all fit under this grouping of animals, plants, and their environment. So that's why this grouping actually makes sense if we're looking at it by topics. Like I said, all of these are aligned to the Google Drive folders. Now, specialists should have hyperlinked these so that all you need to do is click on them and it'll take you straight through to that Google Drive folder that we have. Some specialists have even gone so far as to hyperlink each individual performance expectation. So if they did this, they went above and beyond, and you can gain resources straight into each one of these evidence statement pages as well. Now, we've worked hard to try and make this as easy for you to take a quick peek at what's happening in the lab, and then to get resources that are going to support you with what's happening in the lab, or to teach some consistent science in your classroom when you're ready. So our goal, or the idea, is now when you finally have time to teach science, and let's pretend that you teach 5th grade, when you finally have an opportunity to teach some science, let's pretend it's in the middle of October, you can look on the pacing and see that the science specialist is talking about chemical changes and properties, and it's 5th grade physical science PS 1-4. So you can go into the Google Drive, go into the folder for PS 1-4, which happens to be physical and chemical mixing, and here are a bunch of resources that you can use in that week that are going to relate to what the science specialist is doing. Just the same, another way to approach the resources, if you don't feel as comfortable being in the Google Drive, would be to go back to this science specialist pacing plan, again looking at chemical changes and properties PS 1-4, right, and reference the ebook, or in Primary's case the textbook option, in pages that are correlated to what's going on in the science lab. Either way, the goal is for you to be able to access the science specialist pacing plan and determine which aligned Google Drive resources or FOSS resources you would like to access to help you teach that same performance expectation. I think I've mentioned this before, but one of the best things about all the resources that we've compiled for you is that teachers have already gone through and looked at everything you'll find in these performance expectation documents, which means you can always open and use them with confidence. So finally, I want to leave you with a big thank you for watching this screencast and taking an interest in what's happening with the next generation science standards in Newport-Mesa and at your school site. I want to encourage you to keep collaborating with your science specialist, and don't hesitate to seek them out with questions about teaching science in your classroom. If you're feeling brave and you want to try out some of the hands-on activities, they can be a great resource for many non-consumable supplies and an invaluable resource for tips, tricks, and insights into the hands-on activity you may be wanting to try. If you have any questions about the Google Drive resources, any of our FOSS resources, or if you just want more information about the Next Generation Science Standards, or you want to take the Next Generation Science Standard Orientation course that's been created by science specialists as well, please contact Diana Thompson. She is the District Elementary Science TOSA. She'll be happy to assist you in any way she can. Again, on behalf of the science specialists in Newport-Mesa, thank you for taking the time to view this screencast.